So it's been, I think, like 2 or maybe even 3 months since I made a book review on this channel. Like I said in my last review, I was ready to move to a new house. I've now been moved in for about a month and a half. And I wanted to talk about the last book that I read right before I moved. So it's been like 2 months almost since I read this now. But it's fresh enough in my mind that I want to make sure that I talk about it because I really enjoyed it. It had a pretty major impact on me. This is The Mother of 1084 by Mahasweta Devi. So the author is a famous author as well as a famous social activist in India, specifically in West Bengal. This book takes place in West Bengal during the 1970s. There was a lot of social unrest at that time. I believe that would have been shortly after the partition of India. Let me fact check myself on that real quick. That's probably something I should have known before starting this. Oh, never mind. India was partitioned right after independence. Maybe I'm thinking when did Bangladesh become independent from Pakistan? That might be. Okay, yeah, that's what I was thinking of. So that happened in 1971. This book takes place in like 72 or 73. But the book is in West Bengal, which is in India, not in Bangladesh. So there is social unrest going on in West Bengal at this time, though, and that's kind of the focus of this novel. So the main character, her son, was part of a like left-wing revolutionary movement, and he gets murdered essentially by the police. I mean, it's implied that he was probably planning some illegal actions against the government, but he hadn't. I don't think he had really done anything yet. It was kind of just organizing, and the police murdered him. And the book sort of jumps back and forth between like flashbacks to memories of her son, and then flashbacks to when she first found out he was killed, and then there's also a present day timeline of her kind of still grieving her son a year later, and she's becoming increasingly frustrated with the way that her husband and her other adult children are not still grieving. They've kind of moved on, and they're frustrated with her. It's been a year in the present day narrative, and she's still very much grieving. Her son who was killed was also the child that was closest to her. The other children seem closer to their father, and that may have been some tension about that, and then he gets killed. They're all moving on, and she's still grieving, and that's the fact that she's still grieving and they're not is like worsening this rift in the family. Except now, because he's dead, it's not like two sides, it's just her and then the rest of the family on the other side. And it's really interesting. It's at times a little hard to follow because of the jumping back and forth between all these different times over the span of like a year or maybe 2 years, from like a little bit before he was killed up until a year after he was killed. So the son he is kind of a character in the book, but he is dead for most of the narrative. I mean, he's dead in the present day narrative, and he's dead in more than half of the flashbacks, but we do get dialogue with him here and there in some of the flashbacks. And yeah, it's really interesting because it's kind of a political novel, and like I said, the author is like a social and political activist in addition to being an author. But the focus is not the politics. We don't hear any like details of what exactly the main character's son was involved in, what his politics were. It's sort of implied that she is starting to sympathize with him the more that she learns about it, but we don't really get any details of what his beliefs were. I mean, you can look up like the history of political movements in West Bengal, and India in general in the 1970s, and you can get an idea of what he was probably involved in. But we don't get a lot of details about that, and that's not really the focus of the book. It's more about the emotional impact of like when you get involved in a movement like that and things don't go well for you. It's like there's that has obviously an impact on your family, and that's not necessarily something that is in the forefront of your mind when you are pursuing political endeavors. But it's something that your family has to deal with at some point. And what's interesting is that sort of reckoning with this and grieving her son and learning more about the people that he associated with and the people that he had an impact on while he was involved in this movement, our main character starts to empathize more and more with her son. Like she was already, the two of them were already closer with each other than they were with the rest of the family, but it's almost like they get even closer after he dies, and she ends up almost being like disgusted by her husband and the way that he's dealing with all this and the way that he's moved on so quickly and doesn't seem to empathize with their son at all. It's almost like he's disowned him after he was killed. And yeah, it's a very powerful emotional novel about this woman kind of just dealing with the reality of her son having been killed by the police for his political activities. And like I said, it's been 2 months since I read it. I kind of put off making this review because I was settling into the new house, but so I don't remember a whole lot of specific details, unfortunately. But I did really enjoy this. I definitely recommend it. And yeah, I'm gonna be looking up more by this author, I think. I'm kind of trying to get into Bengali literature in general. I'm actually starting to try to teach myself Bengali, but obviously I'm several years away from reading literature in Bengali. So I'm right now I'm just getting into Bengali literature translated to English, just to kind of start to immerse myself, which is easy to do. Out of all of the literary cultures of South Asia, I think probably the Bengali language has one of the strongest like literary legacies, at least in terms of modern literature. And a lot of it is translated to English, so it's not been difficult to do, and I'm enjoying it a lot. This was the first book on that journey, and then kind of parallel to that, I'm also getting into Northeast Indian literature in translation. Well, sometimes in translation from like Assamese, but there's also some Northeast Indian authors who just write in English from the beginning. So I'm getting into some of that as well, and you'll start to see some of that on this channel. But yeah, this book, very powerful, very emotional book about the reality for the family of someone who gets involved in a radical political movement and is killed as a result. And I highly recommend it. This one was short because, not a lot of details. It's been a while since I read it, but I'll probably reread it at some point in the future, honestly. Maybe I'll read it in Bengali someday, and maybe I'll re-review it then. Until then, or well, until my next review, that is all.